Last Christmas, I thought I was hosting a family dinner. What I was actually doing was stopping my own murder. Because right before our traditional champagne toast, I watched my daughter-in-law slip something into my glass. Something that was meant to kill me for my $20 million inheritance. But here's the thing about being 65 years old and widowed: you develop instincts. Survival instincts. And those instincts saved my life and exposed a monster sitting at my own dinner table. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and this is the story of how Christmas dinner became a crime scene. 10 months before that terrible Christmas, I woke up to find my husband Robert cold beside me in our bed. After 40 years of marriage, after building a life together that felt unbreakable, he was gone in an instant. A heart attack at 67, sudden, silent, devastating. Have you ever tried to learn how to be alone after 4 decades of being half of something? Have you ever had to make coffee for one person when you've been making it for 2 since you were 25 years old? The funeral was a blur of casseroles and condolence cards. Our son Michael held my hand through the service, his wife Sabrina dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief that somehow never smudged her perfect makeup. But it was the silence afterward that nearly killed me. The house Robert and I had filled with laughter, arguments, Sunday morning pancakes, and 40 Christmases. Suddenly it felt like a mausoleum. I'd sit in his chair, wearing his old cardigan because it still smelled like his cologne, and wonder how people survive this kind of loss. How do you rebuild a life when half of you is buried 6 feet underground? What I didn't know then was that Robert, my practical, thoughtful husband, had left me something that would make me a target. Something that would turn my grief into someone else's opportunity. Because when you're worth $20 million and you live alone, some people start looking at you very differently. Even family. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, 3 months after Robert's funeral. I was in my kitchen, staring at a half-eaten piece of toast I couldn't finish, when the phone rang. Mrs. Hayes? This is David Morrison from Pinnacle Insurance. I need to schedule a meeting with you regarding your husband's life insurance policy. $20 million. That's what Robert's life was worth to an insurance company. $20 million that was now mine, sitting in accounts I'd never asked for. It's a substantial amount, Mr. Morrison said gently, sliding the paperwork across his mahogany desk. You'll want to consider financial planning, investment strategies, perhaps some security measures. Security measures. For little old me. Word spreads fast in our neighborhood. Within a week, I was getting phone calls from financial advisors I'd never met, charity organizations with urgent causes, and distant relatives who suddenly remembered they loved me. At the grocery store, people stared. At church, conversations stopped when I walked by. Mrs. Peterson, who'd been my friend for 15 years, started treating me like I might bite her. $20 million, she whispered to Mrs. Collins during coffee hour, not quietly enough. Can you imagine? All that money and no husband to help her spend it. But it was the way people looked at me that frightened me most. Not with pity anymore, but with calculation. Like they were doing math in their heads, figuring out what percentage of my grief might be worth to them. Even Michael started acting differently. More attentive, more concerned about my well-being, more involved in conversations about my future plans. And Sabrina? Sabrina started visiting more often, always with suggestions about how I should treat myself or live a little. Always with that bright smile that never quite reached her eyes. I began to understand why lottery winners say money is a curse. Because when you're worth $20 million, everyone around you becomes a potential threat. Even the people who are supposed to love you. But I was determined not to let Robert's death and this money change who I was. I was still Eleanor Hayes, wife, mother, grandmother. I was still the woman who made Christmas dinner every year. That determination to keep our traditions alive would nearly get me killed. Christmas dinner at the Hayes house wasn't just a meal, It was a religion. For 40 years, Robert and I had hosted Christmas Eve dinner in our dining room, with the same menu, the same decorations, the same champagne toast at the end. I could close my eyes and see every Christmas. Robert carving the turkey with theatrical flourishes that made the grandchildren giggle. Michael as a boy, trying to sneak extra rolls when he thought I wasn't looking. Even the arguments, Uncle Frank's political rants, Aunt Mary's passive-aggressive comments about the gravy. But this would be our first Christmas without Robert. Our first Christmas where I'd have to give the toast instead of him. Our first Christmas where his chair at the head of the table would sit empty. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Michael asked when I called him in November to confirm dinner plans. "It might be too hard. We could go to a restaurant, or Sabrina and I could host." "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "Your father would haunt this house if I broke a 40-year tradition because I was feeling sorry for myself. Because that's what this dinner meant to me, proof that love survives death, that family endures loss, that some things are too important to let go of just because they hurt." I spent weeks preparing. The same turkey recipe I'd perfected over decades. The same sweet potato casserole that was Robert's favorite. The same Christmas china we'd received as wedding gifts, now chipped and faded but irreplaceable. I decorated the house the way Robert liked it. Simple, elegant, warm. Garlands over the fireplace, white lights on the tree, candles on every surface. Not the magazine-perfect displays Sabrina favored, but the comfortable, lived-in beauty of a real home. And yes, I bought the champagne. The same expensive French champagne Robert insisted on for our Christmas toast. The tradition where we'd raise our glasses and remember the year behind us, celebrate the family around us, and hope for the year to come. What I didn't know was that this year's champagne toast would be different in ways I could never have imagined. That the very tradition I was fighting to preserve would become the weapon someone planned to use against me. As December approached, I confirmed the guest list. Michael and Sabrina, of course. Their children. Sabrina's mother Patricia, a sweet woman who'd lost her husband the year before. My sister and her family. 12 people around Robert's table, sharing Robert's favorite meal, raising glasses of Robert's favorite champagne. I thought I was honoring my husband's memory. What I was actually doing was creating the perfect opportunity for someone to destroy it. Let me tell you about the people who sat around my table that Christmas Eve. Because understanding them is crucial to understanding how close I came to never seeing Christmas morning. My son Michael inherited all of Robert's gentle qualities and none of his suspicious nature. At 36, he was a successful architect with kind eyes and a trusting heart that sometimes worried me. He saw the best in everyone, even when everyone included a wife who was slowly poisoning his judgment. Sabrina Hayes, born Sabrina Winters, was 28 years old and looked like she'd stepped off a magazine cover. Blonde hair always perfectly styled, red lipstick that never smudged, designer clothes that fit like they were made for her body. Which they probably were. 8 years younger than Michael, 10 years younger than she acted, and 20 years more ambitious than anyone should be. She'd married my son 5 years ago in a wedding that cost more than most people's houses. Money Michael borrowed against his business to pay for. Sabrina had a gift for making people feel special. She remembered birthdays, asked about your health, complimented your hair. But I'd watched her long enough to see the pattern. The charm was always directed at people who could do something for her. With me, the charm felt different. Forced. Like she was checking items off a list. Compliment Eleanor's cooking, ask about Robert's garden, admire the family photos. She performed the role of loving daughter-in-law the way an actress performs a part she doesn't particularly like. Patricia Winters, Sabrina's mother, was everything her daughter wasn't. Soft-spoken, genuinely kind, recently widowed like me. She'd moved in with Michael and Sabrina 6 months earlier when her own husband died, and I could see the loneliness in her eyes that I recognized in my mirror. The rest of the guest list was safe. My sister Janet and her husband, their adult children, Michael and Sabrina's 2 kids. People who'd been coming to my Christmas dinner for years, who knew their roles in our family tradition. I'd planned the seating carefully. Michael at one end of the table where his father used to sit. Me at the other end. Sabrina to Michael's right, Patricia to his left. The children scattered throughout to keep the conversation lively. What I didn't fully grasp then was how that $20 million settlement had changed the mathematics of family relationships. Suddenly, my health, my happiness, my longevity had become variables in other people's equations. Michael was my only child. When I died, hopefully decades from now, everything would go to him. And what went to Michael would effectively go to Sabrina. Simple math, devastating implications. As Christmas Eve approached, I found myself watching Sabrina more carefully. The way her smile faltered when she thought no one was looking. The way she whispered urgent phone conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room. Call it mother's intuition, call it paranoia, call it the hypervigilance of grief, but something felt wrong. And at Christmas dinner, in my own dining room, surrounded by my own family, that wrongness would nearly kill me. Christmas Eve morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of weather Robert used to say was perfect for family dinners. I woke up in our empty bed and whispered, "Merry Christmas, my love," to the space where he used to sleep. The turkey went into the oven at 8 a.m. Sweet potatoes were peeled and cubed. The dining room was set with our good china, white plates with tiny blue flowers that had survived 40 Christmases and countless family meals. Michael and Sabrina arrived at noon to help, though Sabrina's idea of helping usually involved rearranging my decorations and suggesting improvements to my time-tested recipes. "Mom, this house smells incredible," Michael said, hugging me tight. For a moment, with his arms around me, I felt Robert's presence so strongly it took my breath away. "Eleanor, darling," Sabrina air-kissed both my cheeks, leaving the faint scent of expensive perfume. "You've outdone yourself. The table looks absolutely divine." Divine. A word Sabrina used often, always with that same theatrical emphasis that made me feel like I was watching a performance. But I was watching more carefully now. I noticed how Sabrina's compliments were always followed by subtle suggestions for improvement. How she touched everything, the wine glasses, the centerpiece, the serving dishes, like she was already mentally rearranging my home. "Have you given any more thought to our conversation about financial planning?" she asked as we stood in the kitchen, her voice casual but her eyes intent. Michael and I found this wonderful advisor who specializes in estate planning for people in your situation. People in my situation. Wealthy widows, she meant. "I appreciate the concern, but I'm quite capable of managing my own affairs," I replied, checking the turkey's temperature to avoid meeting her eyes. "Of course you are," she said quickly. "I just worry about you being taken advantage of. There are so many scams targeting older women with substantial assets." The irony was breathtaking. Here she was, warning me about people who might take advantage of older women with money, while planning exactly that. When Patricia arrived, carrying a homemade apple pie and wearing a dress that had seen better decades, the contrast between mother and daughter was startling. Where Sabrina was all polish and performance, Patricia was genuine warmth and quiet sadness. "Eleanor, thank you for including me," Patricia said, squeezing my hand. "I wasn't sure I was ready for Christmas without Harold, but being alone would have been worse." I saw myself in Patricia's eyes, the bewilderment of sudden widowhood, the effort required to participate in celebrations that used to bring joy. We were 2 women learning to navigate holidays without our anchors. As the afternoon progressed and more family arrived, the house filled with the sounds I'd been craving: children's laughter, adult conversation, the clatter of dishes and the clink of glasses being filled. Dinner was perfect. The turkey was moist, the sides were praised, the wine flowed freely. For 2 hours, it felt like every Christmas before, warm, comfortable, filled with the easy intimacy of people who've shared decades of meals together. But as I cleared the dessert plates and prepared to bring out the champagne, I caught Sabrina checking her watch. Not the casual glance of someone enjoying themselves, but the focused attention of someone waiting for something specific. And that's when I noticed it, the subtle shift in her demeanor. The way she kept looking toward the kitchen where I'd left the champagne flutes. The way her manicured fingers drummed silently against the table. "Eleanor," she called out as I headed toward the kitchen, "do you need help with the champagne?" "No, dear," I called back. "I can manage." But as I arranged 12 crystal flutes on my silver tray, as I prepared to pour the champagne that would complete our family tradition, I had no idea that someone at my table was counting on this toast being my last. If you're still watching this, if you recognize that feeling of family members who smile while they scheme, hit that subscribe button. Because what happens next, what I saw with my own eyes, will make you question everyone you trust. And it all started when I walked back into that dining room carrying a tray of champagne and a heart full of Christmas joy, completely unaware that one person at my table was about to try to kill me. By 4 o'clock Christmas Eve afternoon, my house had transformed from a widow's quiet sanctuary into the warm, glowing heart of family tradition it was meant to be. Every room seemed to breathe with Christmas magic. The living room fireplace crackled with applewood logs that filled the air with sweet smoke. White lights twined through garlands on the mantelpiece, casting dancing shadows across the family photographs. 40 years of Christmas mornings, birthday parties, graduations, and anniversaries. But it was the dining room that took my breath away. The long oak table, Robert's pride and joy, handcrafted by his grandfather, gleamed under the soft light of my grandmother's crystal chandelier. 12 place settings of our wedding china created a perfect circle of anticipation. Each place setting told a story. The water glasses etched with tiny roses, wedding gifts from Robert's aunt. The silver napkin rings, tarnished with age but polished with love. The red napkins that had graced this table every Christmas since 1983, faded now but irreplaceable. In the center sat my pride, a low arrangement of white roses and holly, surrounded by pillar candles in varying heights. Simple, elegant, classic. Not the towering, Pinterest-perfect displays Sabrina favored, but something that allowed conversation to flow across the table. From the kitchen came the orchestra of Christmas dinner, the gentle bubble of gravy simmering, the whisper of oven fans working overtime, the soft clink of serving dishes being arranged. The turkey was golden perfection, the sides were ready, and the champagne chilled in the refrigerator like liquid gold waiting for our toast. But preparing the house was nothing compared to preparing my heart. This was my first Christmas as the matriarch, the keeper of traditions, the one responsible for making magic happen. Robert had always been my partner in this dance. Him carving the turkey while I orchestrated the sides, him charming the guests while I managed the kitchen. Now it was all on me. And as I lit the last candle, smoothed the last napkin, checked the last detail, I whispered a prayer to my husband, "Help me make this beautiful, Robert. Help me keep our family together." What I didn't pray for was protection. I should have. Because in an hour, that beautiful table would become a stage for attempted murder. I changed into my navy dress, the one Robert always said brought out my eyes, and added the pearl necklace he'd given me for our 35th anniversary. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman ready to honor 40 years of tradition. At exactly 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang. My guests were arriving, and Christmas dinner was about to begin. What none of us knew was that for one person walking through my front door, this dinner was meant to be my funeral reception. Michael and Sabrina were first, as always, arriving with their arms full of perfectly wrapped gifts and their children buzzing with Christmas excitement. Grandma Eleanor. 8-year-old Emma launched herself into my arms, her red velvet dress already wrinkled from the car ride. "Mommy says you made sugar cookies." "I did indeed," I said, breathing in that sweet child scent of shampoo and excitement. But dinner first, cookies after. Sabrina glided through my entryway like she was making an entrance at a gala. Her emerald green dress was designer perfection, her makeup flawless, her smile bright enough to power the Christmas tree. "Eleanor, darling," she exclaimed, presenting me with a bottle of wine that probably cost more than most people spent on Christmas gifts. "You look absolutely radiant. Doesn't she look wonderful, Michael?" But even as she complimented me, I caught the way her eyes swept over my simple dress, my modest jewelry, my comfortable shoes. The assessment was quick but thorough, like a appraiser cataloging items at an estate sale. Patricia arrived 20 minutes later, carrying her famous apple pie and wearing a shy smile. The contrast between mother and daughter was stark. Where Sabrina commanded attention, Patricia slipped in quietly, grateful just to be included. "Eleanor, thank you again for this," she whispered as I hung up her coat. "I don't know what I would have done tonight alone." "We look after each other," I said, squeezing her hand. "That's what family does." Over Patricia's shoulder, I saw Sabrina's face tighten almost imperceptibly. Did she resent her mother's presence? Or was she calculating how many people would be witnesses to whatever she was planning? My sister Janet arrived with her husband and their 2 adult children, followed by Michael's cousin David and his family. Soon my quiet house was filled with the beautiful chaos of family gathering. Coats being hung, wine being opened, children racing through rooms they'd explored every Christmas for years. At 6 o'clock, I called everyone to the table. Watching them file into the dining room, finding their place cards, settling into chairs around the table Robert and I had chosen together 40 years ago, it should have been pure joy. Michael took his father's place at the head of the table with quiet dignity. Sabrina sat to his right, her posture perfect, her smile bright. Patricia settled beside her daughter, looking grateful but slightly overwhelmed by the elegant table setting. "Before we begin," I said, standing at my end of the table, "I want to thank you all for being here. This tradition meant everything to Robert, and it means everything to me. Family is the greatest blessing we can have. And after dinner, we'll raise a glass to Robert's memory and to the year ahead of us." As I spoke, I noticed Sabrina's hand move to her purse, a small, elegant clutch that seemed out of place at a family dinner. Her fingers traced the clasp absently, like she was checking that something was still there. The gesture was subtle, innocent even. But something about it made the back of my neck prickle with unease. "Well then," I said, forcing brightness into my voice, "let's eat." As I served the first course, I had no idea that someone at my table was counting down the minutes until that champagne toast. Until the moment they expected me to die. For the first hour, everything was exactly as it should be. The turkey was praised, the sides were devoured, and the wine flowed freely. Conversation bubbled around the table like champagne. Stories of the past year, plans for the future, gentle teasing between siblings and cousins. The grandchildren chattered about school and friends and Christmas morning plans. Emma, Michael's youngest, kept sneaking glances at the presents under the tree, while her older brother James entertained everyone with impressions of his teachers. Looking around that table, seeing faces lit by candlelight and flushed with wine and laughter, I felt Robert's presence so strongly it almost took my breath away. This was what we'd built together. Not just a family, but a tradition of love that would outlast us both. I moved between kitchen and dining room with the ease of 40 years' practice. Refilling wine glasses, bringing out fresh rolls, checking that everyone had enough of everything. This was my element, my stage, my gift to the people I loved most. Sabrina was in particularly fine form tonight. She complimented the meal lavishly, asked about family recipes with apparent interest, and charmed my sister's husband with questions about his new business. "Eleanor, you simply must give me your stuffing recipe," she gushed as I cleared the main course. "I've been trying to recreate it for years." But even as she performed the role of devoted daughter-in-law, I noticed things that felt off. The way she kept checking her watch. The way her laughter seemed just a beat too late, like she was remembering to react rather than reacting naturally. And her phone. She'd check it obsessively throughout dinner, sliding it out of her purse, glancing at the screen, then quickly putting it away. When I asked if everything was all right, she claimed it was just work emails. Work emails. On Christmas Eve night. When I brought out Patricia's apple pie alongside my traditional Christmas pudding, the table erupted in appreciative murmurs. But as I cut generous slices and passed plates around the table, I caught Sabrina staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't the fond look of a daughter-in-law watching her husband's mother serve dessert. It was something more calculating, more predatory. Like she was memorizing this moment for some reason I couldn't fathom. Save room for champagne, I announced as people finished their dessert. We still have our Christmas toast. Most of the table responded with good-natured groans about being too full, or jokes about needing the champagne to digest all the food. But Sabrina's reaction was different. Her entire body went still. Her fork stopped halfway to her mouth. And for just a moment, her mask slipped, revealing something cold and focused underneath. "Of course," she said quickly, her bright smile snapping back into place. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." But the damage was done. In that split second of stillness, I'd seen something that made every maternal instinct I possessed start screaming warnings. Something was very, very wrong. As I cleared the dessert plates and prepared to bring out the champagne, my hands were trembling slightly. Not from age or fatigue, but from a growing certainty that tonight's toast was more significant than anyone else at the table realized. I just didn't know how significant until I was almost dead. As the evening progressed, I found myself studying Sabrina with the focus of a detective. What I saw made my blood run cold. Every gesture, every glance, every smile seemed calculated. When Patricia complimented the decorations, Sabrina's eyes flicked to the chandelier, the paintings, the antique sideboard, not with appreciation, but with appraisal. Like she was already mentally cataloging my possessions. She steered conversations in strange directions. When my nephew mentioned his new financial advisor, Sabrina peppered him with questions about estate planning. When Janet talked about her neighbor's recent hospitalization, Sabrina wanted details about insurance coverage and medical bills. "It's so important to plan for these things," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Especially for people our age who live alone. You never know what might happen." People our age. I was 65, not 90. And the way she said alone made it sound like a terminal diagnosis. Throughout dinner, she continued her obsessive phone checking. But I began to notice a pattern. She only looked at it when she thought I wasn't watching. And each time she checked it, her expression grew more tense, more focused. Her purse sat beside her chair like a guard dog. When Emma accidentally bumped into it while chasing her brother, Sabrina's reaction was swift and sharp. "Careful, sweetheart," she said, pulling the purse closer to her body. "Mommy has important things in there." Halfway through dessert, Sabrina excused herself to the bathroom. As she walked past my chair, I caught a whiff of something unusual, not her expensive perfume, but something chemical, medicinal. It was faint, but unmistakable. When she returned 5 minutes later, her demeanor had changed again. She seemed more focused, more alert. Like someone who had just made a final decision about something important. "Eleanor," she said as I stood to clear the last of the dessert plates, "would you like help bringing out the champagne? I know how special this toast is to your family." Something in the way she offered made every alarm bell in my head start ringing. Too eager, too helpful, too interested in a tradition she'd never cared about before. "That's very kind," I said carefully, "but I can manage." "Are you sure?" "It would be my pleasure. Really." The insistence was what did it. In 5 years of marriage to my son, Sabrina had never once volunteered to help with the champagne toast. She usually complained that the glasses were too delicate, or that champagne gave her headaches. As I looked at her beautiful, smiling face, as I heard her voice offering help with such sweet concern, I finally understood what I was seeing. This wasn't family dinner. This was a setup. The constant phone checking, the purse guarding, the chemical smell, the sudden interest in the champagne. It all added up to something so horrible I could barely let myself think it. Sabrina wasn't here to celebrate Christmas. She was here to end it. Permanently. Standing there in my dining room, surrounded by my family, looking at the woman who had married my son and was now planning to murder me, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Robert's death. Pure, focused, protective rage. She wanted to help with the champagne? Perfect. Because I was about to give her all the help she could handle. Time for our Christmas toast, I announced, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The table responded with the gentle chaos of a large family settling down. Chairs scooting closer, conversations winding down, attention focusing on the tradition we'd observed for 4 decades. In the kitchen, I arranged 12 crystal flutes on my silver serving tray with hands that looked steady but felt like they were shaking. The champagne, Dom Perignon 2010, Robert's favorite, sat in its ice bucket like liquid gold waiting to be transformed into something deadly. As I worked, I could feel Sabrina's attention like a physical weight. She'd positioned herself at the kitchen doorway, ostensibly chatting with Patricia about holiday recipes, but her eyes never left my movements. "Eleanor, please let me help," she said again, stepping toward me with that practiced smile. "Those glasses look so delicate, and the tray is quite heavy." "Thank you, dear, but I've been managing this tradition longer than you've been alive," I replied, not quite able to keep the edge out of my voice. I carried the tray into the dining room, placing it on the sideboard where it caught the light from the chandelier. 12 empty glasses, waiting to be filled. 12 people, waiting for tradition to unfold. But only one of those glasses would be poisoned. The question was, which one? "Michael, would you help me pour?" I asked, a slight tremor in my voice that I hoped sounded like emotion rather than fear. As my son stood and moved to help me, I watched Sabrina's face carefully. She was tracking every movement, every glass, calculating something I was only beginning to understand. I poured each glass with deliberate care, placing them in front of each guest. Sabrina's glass went in front of her seat. Patricia's beside her daughter. Mine at the head of the table where I would stand to give the toast. But as I placed the last glass, I made a decision that would save my life. Instead of returning immediately to my seat, I lingered by the sideboard, pretending to arrange the empty champagne bottle, watching the table through the reflection in the window. That's when I saw it. Sabrina's hand, moving with practiced stealth toward the glass I'd placed in front of my chair. Her fingers, elegant and manicured, hovering just above the rim. And then, in the warm glow of candlelight, in the middle of my family's Christmas celebration, I watched my daughter-in-law slip something into my champagne. It was quick, almost invisible, a pinch of something that dissolved instantly into the golden liquid. But I saw it. The faint swirl at the bottom of the flute. The way she glanced around to make sure no one was watching. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. My vision tunneled. My hands gripped the edge of the sideboard to keep from falling. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Tried to poison me at my own Christmas table, surrounded by my own family, using the tradition I held most sacred as the weapon for my murder. But as Sabrina settled back in her chair, satisfaction flickering across her beautiful face, she made one crucial mistake. She assumed I hadn't seen. "Everyone ready?" I called, my voice somehow steady as I moved toward my chair, and the glass of poisoned champagne waiting for me. The table quieted, faces turning toward me expectantly. 12 people waiting for the toast that would honor Robert's memory and welcome the new year. What they didn't know was that this toast was about to become something entirely different. Not a celebration of life, but an exposure of attempted murder. I reached for my glass, the glass Sabrina had poisoned, and prepared to give the performance of my life. Are you holding your breath right now? Because what happens next will either make you cheer or make you cry. If you're invested in Eleanor's survival, if you need to know how this ends, smash that subscribe button now. Because the next few minutes changed everything. And it all started with 3 simple words: Merry Christmas, family. Time slowed to a crawl as I watched Sabrina's manicured fingers hover over my champagne glass. In the soft glow of the chandelier, I could see everything with terrifying clarity. The powder was white, almost translucent, barely visible as it fell from her fingertips into the golden champagne. It dissolved instantly, leaving only the faintest shimmer on the surface, like oil on water, there for a split second before disappearing completely. This wasn't the clumsy attempt of an amateur. The movement was practiced, confident, swift. She'd done this before, or at least rehearsed it until it was perfect. The timing, the positioning, the quick glance around the table, all of it spoke of careful planning. As soon as the powder hit the champagne, Sabrina's entire demeanor changed. Her shoulders relaxed. Her smile became genuine. Not the performed brightness she'd worn all evening, but real satisfaction. The look of someone who had just completed a difficult task successfully. She settled back into her chair with the fluid grace of a cat, picking up her own untainted glass and examining it as if checking for water spots. But I caught the way her eyes flicked to my poisoned champagne, then to my face, calculating how long it would take for whatever she'd slipped me to work. Around the table, my family continued their gentle conversations, completely unaware that attempted murder had just occurred in their presence. Michael was helping his youngest daughter adjust her napkin. Patricia was complimenting Janet on her earrings. The children were giggling about something at their end of the table. The contrast was sickening. This warm, loving scene, everything Robert and I had worked 40 years to create, was now the backdrop for my daughter-in-law's plan to kill me for money. I watched Sabrina's hand slip back to her purse, presumably to dispose of whatever container had held the poison. Her movements were casual, natural, giving nothing away to the other 11 people at the table. This hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment decision. She'd brought poison to my Christmas dinner. She'd planned this for weeks, maybe months. While I'd been grieving my husband and trying to rebuild my life, she'd been plotting my death. $20 million. That's what my life was worth to her. Not the woman who had raised her husband, not the grandmother to her children, not the human being who had welcomed her into our family. Just $20 million walking around in an inconvenient elderly body. Eleanor, darling, she called sweetly, are you ready for your beautiful toast? I know how much this tradition meant to Robert. The fact that she could invoke my dead husband's name while trying to kill me was breathtaking in its cruelty. She was going to make me honor Robert's memory with the last words I ever spoke. Just gathering my thoughts, I managed, my voice somehow steady. Inside, my mind was racing. I had maybe 30 seconds before someone would expect me to pick up that glass and drink the poison meant to kill me. 30 seconds to decide whether to expose her in front of the family, call the police, or find another way to turn her plan against her. But as I looked around the table at the faces of people I loved, including Patricia, sweet Patricia who was mourning her husband just like I was mourning mine, I knew exactly what I had to do. If Sabrina wanted to use poison at my Christmas table, then poison she would get. Just not in the glass she expected. For a moment that felt like an eternity, I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't process what I'd just witnessed. My daughter-in-law, the mother of my grandchildren, had just tried to murder me at my own Christmas table. My brain raced through possibilities like a computer trying to solve an impossible equation. Call the police? She'd deny everything, and there were no witnesses to what I'd seen. Confront her directly? She'd claim I was a confused elderly woman imagining things. Drink the poison and hope someone could save me? That was suicide. My hands began to shake so violently I had to grip the back of my chair to steady them. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The room felt suddenly airless, the warm glow of candles and Christmas lights becoming oppressive instead of comforting. Around me, conversation continued as if the world hadn't just tilted off its axis. Michael was telling a story about his latest architectural project. The children were debating whether Santa would visit Patricia's new apartment. Janet was asking someone to pass the remaining dinner rolls. I realized they were all waiting for me. The matriarch. The keeper of traditions. The woman who was supposed to raise her glass of poisoned champagne and welcome them all into the new year with words of love and hope. Mom. Michael's voice cut through my panic. Are you feeling all right? You look a little pale. If I appeared sick or distressed, someone might insist on calling a doctor. They might take the champagne away for testing. They might discover what Sabrina had done, and then what? A scandal that would destroy our family? A trial that would traumatize my grandchildren? The knowledge that their mother had tried to kill their grandmother for money? No. That couldn't happen. Whatever Sabrina had planned for me, I wouldn't let her destroy the innocent people I loved in the process. That's when I looked across the table and saw Patricia, sweet Patricia, sitting beside her daughter with complete trust in her eyes. Patricia, who had lost her husband just like I had lost Robert. Patricia, who was grateful to be included in our family celebration. If Sabrina could use poison against an elderly widow for money, then perhaps she needed to learn what it felt like when poison came home to roost. Was it right to put an innocent woman at risk? No. But Patricia would sip, not drain the glass. She would get help immediately. She might survive what was intended to kill me outright. And Sabrina would have to watch her own mother drink the poison she'd prepared for me. She would have to choose between exposing her own crime to save her mother, or watching the consequences of her evil plan unfold. My hands stopped shaking. My breathing steadied. The panic receded, replaced by something cold and focused and absolutely determined. I'm fine, sweetheart, I said to Michael, my voice warm with the love I felt for my son. Just taking a moment to appreciate having all of you here. I stepped toward the table, toward the glass of poisoned champagne that was meant to be my death sentence. But I wasn't Eleanor the victim anymore. I was Eleanor the protector, Eleanor the judge, Eleanor the woman who would make sure evil didn't go unpunished at her Christmas table. I moved toward my chair with the deliberate grace of someone who had presided over 40 Christmas dinners. Every step was measured, natural, giving no hint of the deadly drama playing out in plain sight. Instead of sitting immediately, I paused behind Patricia's chair, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Patricia dear, that dress color is absolutely lovely on you. Don't you think so, Sabrina? Sabrina's attention snapped to her mother, exactly as I'd hoped. Oh yes, Mother looks wonderful tonight, she said, but her eyes kept flicking to my poisoned glass, waiting for me to pick it up. As the women discussed Patricia's dress, I reached across the table as if adjusting the centerpiece. My movements were casual, grandmotherly, the kind of fussing with table arrangements that hostesses do without thinking. In one smooth motion, I lifted Patricia's champagne glass and placed it in front of my chair. Then I took my poisoned glass, the one Sabrina had doctored, and set it down in front of Patricia. The entire exchange took perhaps 3 seconds. To anyone watching casually, it looked like I was simply rearranging glasses for better table symmetry. But I held my breath, waiting to see if Sabrina had noticed. Her eyes were still on her mother's dress, still playing the role of dutiful daughter admiring her parent. She hadn't seen the switch. The poisoned champagne now sat innocently in front of the woman who had raised her murderous daughter. I moved back to my chair and stood behind it, hands resting on the back in the traditional position for giving a toast. The untainted glass, Patricia's original glass, waited in front of me, clean and safe. Looking at that poisoned champagne sitting in front of sweet, unsuspecting Patricia, I felt a cold satisfaction that probably made me as morally complicated as the woman who had tried to kill me. But sometimes justice requires getting your hands dirty. I glanced at Sabrina one more time. She was settling back into her chair, her purse secured beside her, her perfect smile in place. She thought her plan was proceeding flawlessly. She thought that in a few minutes, I would drink poison and begin the process of dying while she played the concerned daughter-in-law. Instead, her own mother would be the first to taste the consequences of her daughter's evil. "Well then," I said, lifting my safe glass high in the traditional gesture, "shall we toast?" Around the table, 11 people reached for their champagne glasses. Patricia's fingers wrapped around the stem of what had been my glass, the glass that contained enough poison to kill me. There was no stopping this now. In 30 seconds, we would all drink, and Sabrina's carefully planned murder would backfire in the most poetic way possible. I looked around the table at my family, my beloved, innocent family, and prepared to give the most important speech of my life. Not just a Christmas toast, but a final statement before justice was served. "To family," I said, my voice carrying the warmth of 40 years of Christmas traditions, "to the love that binds us together, and to the memory of those who can't be with us tonight." "To family," the table echoed, and 12 champagne flutes rose in the air, catching the light from the chandelier like liquid gold suspended in crystal. I brought my safe glass to my lips and took a small sip, watching over the rim as Patricia did the same. The champagne was perfect, crisp, effervescent, tasting of celebration and joy. But I barely registered the flavor, focused entirely on Patricia's face. At first, nothing happened. Patricia smiled, nodded approvingly at the champagne's quality, and took another small sip. But then, so subtly I almost missed it, her expression began to change. A slight frown creased her forehead. She touched her throat gently, as if something felt odd. She took another sip, smaller this time, and the frown deepened. Beside her, Sabrina was watching me with barely concealed anticipation. She was waiting for me to show symptoms, to begin the slow collapse she had planned. She had no idea that her own mother was drinking the poison meant for me. Patricia set down her glass and pressed a hand to her chest. "I feel a bit," she began, then stopped, looking confused by her own words. "Are you all right, Mom?" Sabrina asked, but her attention was still primarily focused on me. She was expecting me to be the one showing distress. Around the table, my family stood in various states of shock and helplessness. They wanted to help, but what do you do when someone is dying of poison and you don't know what the poison is or how to counter it? But there was someone in the room who knew. Someone who had brought the poison, who had planned this, who could identify what Patricia had ingested and possibly save her life. The question was, would Sabrina choose to save her mother by confessing to attempted murder? Or would she let Patricia die to protect her own secret? "Patricia, stay with us," Janet was saying, patting the older woman's hand gently. "Help is coming. Just keep breathing, honey. Just keep fighting." But as I watched this scene unfold, my family rallying around a poisoning victim, desperate to save a life, I knew that the person they needed to look to for answers was sitting right there at my Christmas table. The person who had turned our celebration into a medical emergency. The person who had brought death to my dining room and called it love. It was time for everyone to learn the truth about the woman Michael had married. While my family focused on Patricia's medical crisis, I did something that would have seemed callous if anyone had been paying attention. I picked up the champagne glass that had originally been mine, the one that now sat in front of Patricia's empty chair, and held it up to the light. There, swirling at the bottom of the crystal flute, was the faintest oily residue. Almost invisible unless you knew what to look for, but unmistakable once you saw it. The powder Sabrina had dropped into my champagne hadn't dissolved completely after all. Under the soft glow of my chandelier, the evidence of attempted murder caught the light like a twisted rainbow. Whatever she had used, and I suspected it was something sophisticated, something that would have looked like a heart attack or stroke in an elderly woman, had left its signature in the bottom of the glass. This wasn't paranoia or imagination. This wasn't the confused fantasy of a grief-stricken widow. This was physical, chemical, undeniable proof that someone had tried to poison me at my own Christmas table. Very carefully, I set the glass down where no one could accidentally disturb it. The paramedics would need this. The police would need this. The toxicology report would need this. For contrast, I examined the champagne glass I had drunk from, Patricia's original glass. Crystal clear, no residue, no shimmer, no evidence of tampering. The difference was subtle but conclusive. From the corner of my eye, I saw Sabrina watching me examine the glasses. Her face was a mask of terror now, all pretense of concern for her mother overwhelmed by the dawning realization that the evidence of her crime was sitting in plain sight. Our eyes met across the chaos of the medical emergency. In that moment, we both understood the situation completely. She knew that I knew. I knew that she knew I knew. And we both knew that the glass in my hands could destroy her life. The question hanging between us was what I would do with that knowledge. Whether I would expose her immediately, or give her a chance to save her mother by confessing voluntarily. But time was running short. Patricia's breathing was becoming more labored. Her skin was growing paler. Whatever was in that residue was working its way through her system, and without knowing what it was, the paramedics would be working blind. I held Patricia's life in my hands, not because I had poisoned her, but because I had the power to force her daughter to provide the information that could save her. It was fitting, in a way. Sabrina had tried to use poison to steal my life for money. Now she would have to choose between her freedom and her mother's life. The sirens were getting closer. The paramedics would be here soon. And when they arrived, they would ask questions that Sabrina couldn't answer without revealing what she'd done. Unless she chose to speak first. The paramedics burst through my front door like a medical SWAT team. 2 young professionals with equipment bags and a stretcher, their movements efficient and practiced. The lead medic, a woman with kind eyes and steady hands, went straight to Patricia while her partner began setting up monitoring equipment. "What's the patient's name?" the lead medic asked, already checking Patricia's pulse and breathing as she spoke. "Patricia Winters," Michael answered. "She's 62, generally healthy, no major medical conditions that we know of." "When did the symptoms start?" The questions came quickly, professionally. What was she doing when they began? Any known allergies? Has she eaten or drunk anything unusual tonight? It was that last question that sent a chill through the room. Because yes, Patricia had drunk something unusual. She had drunk champagne meant to kill me. The paramedics' practiced hands moved over Patricia with quick efficiency. Checking pupils, listening to heart and lung sounds, testing reflexes. Her partner was taking vital signs and preparing oxygen equipment. Pupils are constricted, pulse is rapid and weak, breathing is labored with some wheezing, the lead medic reported to her partner. Skin is cool and diaphoretic. Could be cardiac, could be respiratory, but given the rapid onset. She paused, looked up at the family surrounding Patricia's chair, and spoke the words that would haunt Sabrina for the rest of her life. "This presentation is consistent with poisoning." The room erupted in gasps and denials. "Poisoning?" Michael's voice cracked on the word. "That's impossible. We were just having Christmas dinner. How could she be poisoned?" The rapid onset, the specific combination of symptoms, it's textbook toxicology, the paramedic explained as she prepared an 4-line. We need to get her to the hospital immediately for blood work and possible antidote therapy. Her partner looked up from his equipment. Do you have any idea what the toxin might have been? Cleaning products accidentally ingested? Medication overdose? Anything that might help us narrow down treatment options. The room fell silent except for Patricia's labored breathing and the soft beeping of medical equipment. This was the moment when someone needed to speak up, to provide the information that could save a woman's life. My family looked at each other with helpless confusion. They had no idea what could have poisoned Patricia. They'd all eaten the same food, drunk from the same wine bottles, shared the same celebration. But Sabrina knew. Sabrina knew exactly what Patricia had ingested, exactly how much, exactly what antidote might help. She could save her mother's life with 3 words: I poisoned her. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Patricia's breathing grew more labored. The paramedics prepared to transport her to the hospital where doctors would work blind, trying to save a woman without knowing what was killing her. And through it all, Sabrina sat frozen in her chair, faced with the ultimate choice between saving her mother and saving herself. It was perfect, terrible justice. The woman who had tried to kill me for money was now forced to choose between confession and matricide. In 30 seconds, the paramedics would load Patricia onto a stretcher and race her to the hospital. In 30 seconds, the opportunity for antidote therapy would slip away. If your heart is pounding right now, if you need to know whether Sabrina will save her mother or protect herself, hit that subscribe button. Because what she chose to do next revealed exactly what kind of person she really was. 29 seconds. 28. 27. 26 seconds. 25. 24. We need to move her now, the lead paramedic said, motioning for her partner to position the stretcher beside Patricia's chair. Without knowing the toxin, we're working blind at the hospital. Every minute counts. My family stood frozen around the dining room, watching Patricia being prepared for transport, their faces etched with confusion and fear. They wanted to help, but how do you help when you don't understand what's happening? That's when something strange occurred. The room, which had been filled with panicked voices and medical instructions, began to fall silent. Not the silence of resolution, but the heavy, expectant quiet that comes before a storm breaks. One by one, eyes began to turn toward Sabrina. Maybe it was the way she sat so perfectly still while everyone else moved with purpose. Maybe it was the way her face had gone beyond pale into something that looked almost gray. Maybe it was simply the instinct people have when something feels wrong. My nephew David stopped mid-reach for Patricia's coat. Janet paused in her efficient gathering of Patricia's purse. Even the paramedics seemed to sense the shift in the room's energy. Through all of this, Sabrina remained frozen in her chair like a beautiful statue carved from guilt and terror. Her hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly I could see her knuckles standing out white against her skin. Her breathing was shallow, almost as labored as her mother's. And in that rising silence, that growing awareness, I realized that my family's instincts were beginning to tell them what their minds refused to accept, that the answer to Patricia's poisoning was sitting right there at our Christmas table. I looked at the champagne glass with its telltale residue, still sitting exactly where I'd placed it. I looked at Sabrina, trapped between saving her mother and destroying herself. I looked at my family, innocent and confused and deserving the truth. 20 seconds had passed. The paramedics were lifting Patricia onto the stretcher. In another minute, she would be in the ambulance, racing to a hospital where doctors would try to save her without knowing what they were fighting. I could wait for Sabrina to find courage or conscience. I could hope she would choose her mother over herself. Or I could speak the truth that would save Patricia's life and expose the evil that had invaded my Christmas table. The choice, when it came, was easy. I was a mother first, a grandmother first, a woman who protected her family above all else. Even when the threat came from within. As the paramedics secured Patricia to the stretcher, as my family gathered their coats to follow to the hospital, I took a deep breath and prepared to shatter the silence with words that would change everything. Because some silences aren't meant to be kept. Some secrets are too dangerous to protect. And some people need to face the consequences of their choices, especially when those choices involve poison at a Christmas table. The rising silence had reached its peak. Now it was time for truth. Before you take Patricia to the hospital, I said, my voice cutting through the controlled chaos with quiet authority, the paramedics need to know what poisoned her. Everyone stopped. The paramedics paused in their preparations. Michael looked up from gathering coats. Janet turned from the doorway where she'd been ready to follow the stretcher. Every face in the room turned toward me. I know what happened because I watched it happen, I continued, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal. During our champagne toast preparation, I saw Sabrina put something into my glass. The words hit the room like a physical force. Michael's face went white. David took an involuntary step backward. The paramedics looked between me and Sabrina with professional alertness. She waited until everyone was distracted, I said, meeting each person's eyes in turn. Then she slipped what looked like powder into the champagne glass that was meant for me. It dissolved almost immediately, leaving just a faint shimmer. I moved to the table and carefully lifted the champagne glass that had originally been mine. This glass still has residue at the bottom. You can see it if you hold it to the light. The lead paramedic took the glass from me, examining it with professional interest. There is something here, she confirmed, her voice careful but clear. Some kind of residual substance. Around the room, my family stared at Sabrina with expressions of dawning horror. The beautiful daughter-in-law they'd welcomed for 5 years, the mother of their grandchildren and nieces, had just been accused of attempted murder. I switched glasses during the toast, I said quietly. I gave Sabrina's mother the champagne that was meant to kill me. The room fell so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the mantelpiece, the soft wheeze of Patricia's breathing, the distant sound of Christmas music still playing from the kitchen radio. "Mom," Michael whispered, his voice breaking on the single word. Are you telling us that Sabrina tried to?" "I'm telling you that your wife brought poison to our Christmas dinner and put it in my champagne glass, intending to kill me for the insurance money your father left me." There was no gentle way to say it, no soft words that could cushion the impact of that truth. My son's wife had tried to murder his mother at the family Christmas table. "Ma'am," the paramedic said to Sabrina, her voice professional but urgent, "if this is accurate, we need to know what substance was used. Your mother's life depends on proper treatment." All eyes turned to Sabrina, who sat frozen in her chair like a deer caught in headlights. Her perfect makeup was streaked with tears, she hadn't realized she was crying. Her hands shook visibly as she reached for her purse. She began, then stopped. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't mean. It wasn't supposed to." "What was it?" the paramedic pressed. "What did you put in the champagne?" With shaking hands, Sabrina reached into her purse and withdrew a small vial nearly empty. "Digitalis," she whispered. From heart medication. I thought, at her age, it would look natural." The paramedic immediately radioed to the hospital. "We have confirmed digitalis poisoning. Patient is a 62-year-old female, unknown dosage, ingested approximately 30 minutes ago. Prep for cardiac monitoring and atropine if needed." As I stood there in my dining room, watching Sabrina finally face the consequences of her evil plan, I felt a satisfaction deeper than revenge. This was justice. Not perfect, not clean, but absolutely deserved. The truth was finally out. The poison was identified. Patricia could be saved. And everyone in my family now knew exactly what kind of person they'd been sharing Christmas dinner with. I saw it too. The voice came from the far end of the table, quiet but clear. Everyone turned to see David, my nephew, standing with his hands clasped in front of him and his face pale but determined. David. Janet's voice carried surprise and something that sounded like fear. Nobody wants their child to be witness to attempted murder. I was telling the story about the new project at work, David said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. I had a clear view down the table. I saw Aunt Eleanor arranging the champagne glasses, and I saw. He paused, looking directly at Sabrina. I saw you lean forward and do something to one of the glasses. At the time, I thought maybe you were just adjusting it or cleaning something off the rim, he continued. But your movement was so deliberate, so careful. And you looked around afterward like you were checking to see if anyone had noticed. My sister's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and then horror as she understood that her son had witnessed an attempted murder and hadn't recognized it at the time. I should have said something then, David said, his voice heavy with guilt. If I had just asked what you were doing, maybe. You couldn't have known, I said gently. Nobody expects to see poison administered at a family dinner. Your observation proves what happened, and that's what matters now. She checked her watch right after, David added, his memory clearly sharpening as he spoke. And she kept looking at Aunt Eleanor during the toast, like she was waiting for something to happen. Each detail David provided was another nail in the coffin of Sabrina's denial. She couldn't claim it was accidental now, couldn't suggest that elderly confusion had made me imagine things. There was a witness, clear-eyed and certain. I watched Sabrina's face as she realized that her perfect crime had been observed not just by me, but by someone else entirely. Someone with no reason to lie, no motive to implicate her falsely. We need to move, the lead paramedic announced, clearly wanting to get Patricia to medical care while the family drama played out. The hospital has been notified about the digitalis. Time is critical. As the stretcher was wheeled toward the door, the family was torn between following Patricia to provide support and staying to confront the woman who had poisoned her. Michael stood frozen between his unconscious mother-in-law and his wife, his face a mask of confusion and betrayal. The woman he loved had just been accused of attempting to murder his mother by two separate witnesses. Michael, I said quietly, go with Patricia. She needs family at the hospital. What I didn't say, but what he understood, was that Sabrina was no longer family. Not after tonight. Not after poison at our Christmas table. As most of the family prepared to follow Patricia to the hospital, I realized that this was the moment when everything would change. When the life we'd built together, the traditions, the celebrations, the comfortable assumption of love and safety, would have to be rebuilt from the foundation up. Because some truths, once spoken, can never be taken back. After the paramedics left with Patricia and most of the family followed in their cars, my dining room felt cavernous and cold. The Christmas decorations that had seemed so warm and welcoming now looked garish against the backdrop of attempted murder. Michael stood in the doorway, looking back and forth between me and Sabrina like he was watching a tennis match played with grenades. His face showed the terrible struggle of a man trying to reconcile the wife he loved with the would-be killer she'd been revealed to be. There has to be some mistake, he said, his voice hollow with desperate hope. Sabrina, tell them. Tell them this is all some horrible misunderstanding. But Sabrina sat slumped in her chair, mascara streaked down her cheeks, the empty vial of digitalis still clutched in her trembling hand. The perfect composure that had been her trademark was completely shattered. Michael, She began, then stopped. What could she say? That she'd only meant to kill his mother a little bit? That $20 million had seemed worth more than Eleanor's life? You tried to kill my mother, Michael said, his voice gaining strength as the reality settled over him. At Christmas dinner. At her own table. You brought poison into her home. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, Sabrina whispered. She wasn't supposed to switch the glasses. It was supposed to be quick, peaceful. Like a heart attack. No one would have questioned it at her age. With those words, any pretense of innocence evaporated. She'd just admitted to planning my murder in detail, to researching how to kill me in a way that would look natural. I watched my son's face as he truly understood what his wife was. Not just someone who had made a terrible mistake, but someone who had coldly calculated the murder of his mother for financial gain. Our children, he whispered. Emma and James. They could have watched their grandmother die right in front of them. They could have been traumatized for life. Because that was the other piece of this crime, Sabrina hadn't just been willing to kill me. She'd been willing to let her own children witness what they would have believed was their grandmother's sudden, natural death. I loved you, Michael said, his voice breaking. I trusted you with our children, with our life, with my family. And you tried to murder my mother for money. The money was for us, Sabrina said desperately. For our future, for the children's college funds. I was thinking about our family. Our family. Michael's laugh was bitter and broken. You tried to orphan me for money. You tried to rob our children of their grandmother for money. That's not family, that's greed. He turned to look at me, standing calm and strong beside the Christmas tree that had witnessed this entire nightmare unfold. Mom, I'm so sorry, he said, tears streaming down his face. I brought her into our family. I married her. This is my fault. No, sweetheart, I said gently. You married someone you thought you knew. Evil people are very good at hiding what they are until they don't need to anymore. As Michael looked between his poisonous wife and his surviving mother, I knew he was facing the hardest decision of his life, choosing between the woman he'd loved and the family she tried to destroy. But really, after tonight, after poison at the Christmas table, was there any choice at all? I'm sitting in my garden this morning, 6 months after the Christmas that changed everything, watching the roses Robert planted bloom in their second spring since his death. The morning is peaceful, quiet, filled with the kind of gentle contentment that comes after surviving something that should have killed you. Patricia survived. The quick identification of the digitalis poisoning saved her life, though she spent 3 days in intensive care and weeks recovering from what the doctors called a significant cardiac event. She lives in a lovely assisted living facility now, surrounded by people who genuinely care for her well-being. We visit each other regularly, 2 widows who understand what it means to be betrayed by someone who was supposed to love us. She tells me she's grateful, not for the poisoning, but for learning the truth about her daughter before it was too late. Sabrina was arrested that Christmas night and charged with attempted murder in the 1st degree. The physical evidence, the witness testimony, and her own confession made the case straightforward. She pled guilty and received 15 years in prison. Michael filed for divorce immediately and was granted full custody of the children. It took months of therapy for Emma and James to understand why their mother wouldn't be coming home, why Christmas dinner would never be the same, why their father cried so often in those first weeks. But children are remarkably resilient when they're surrounded by love and honesty. They visit me every Sunday now, helping tend Robert's roses and learning family recipes I never had a chance to teach their mother. Our family, what's left of it, is closer now than we were before. Not because of the trauma we shared, but because we faced it with truth and love and absolute commitment to protecting each other. The $20 million that Sabrina coveted so desperately? I've set up education trusts for my grandchildren, made donations to domestic violence shelters and elder abuse prevention programs. Money meant to destroy our family is now helping others stay safe. This past Christmas, we gathered around my table again. Michael, the children, Patricia, my sister's family. We raised glasses of apple cider instead of champagne, and I gave a toast about survival, about truth, and about the difference between love and possession. Because that's what Sabrina never understood. Love doesn't count assets or calculate inheritance potential. Love doesn't plan murder at Christmas dinner. Love protects, love endures, love chooses the welfare of others over personal gain. I learned something about myself that night. I learned that grief hadn't made me weak or vulnerable or useless. It had made me strong enough to survive an attack from within my own family. Strong enough to turn evil back on itself. Strong enough to protect the people I loved, even when it meant making impossible choices. Some people see elderly women as easy targets, as vulnerable victims to be manipulated or eliminated for their assets. What they don't understand is that women who have survived decades of life, who have buried husbands and raised children and weathered countless storms, are not helpless. We are repositories of wisdom, carriers of strength, protectors of family. We have lived through enough to recognize evil when we see it, and we have loved deeply enough to fight it when we must. That Christmas night, Sabrina thought she was eliminating an inconvenient elderly woman who stood between her and $20 million. What she actually did was awaken a force she never saw coming. A mother's protective love armed with a survivor's intelligence. And that, as Robert would have said, made all the difference in the world. If this story moved you, if you recognize the strength that comes from being underestimated, subscribe and share it. Because every family needs to know that our elders aren't easy targets, they're treasures worth protecting, and they're stronger than anyone imagines. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had your instincts tell you something was wrong about someone everyone else trusted? Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and protecting family? Your story might help someone else trust their instincts when it matters most. Because sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is refusing to be the victim someone planned for you to be. This is Eleanor's truth. And now it's yours too.